when Shlomo Zalman had gone.
Yeah.
And he said that Shlomo Zalman said pure grape juice. He used to have pure grape juice.
Yeah, the many. Yeah, I actually saw. She was asking very about grape juice.
And it says that Moshe said that it has to be a minimum of a third.
Right. Actually, Pini just showed me, besides for having your cup of wine today, it's milky. How can you have milky chocolate or chalamoid? You're supposed to be meaty all the time.
He has it for breakfast.
What? Besides for having a cup of wine, I hope you all had a cup of wine and some meat. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah.
That's very nice.
Right. Besides for that, there's a mitzvah lahakpil p'nei Rabbi b'regel. Yes. Not every meal. Try. By the way, besides for your wine and your meat, there's a mitzvah lahakpil p'nei Rabbi b'regel. You should come visit your Rav, make a meeting. You should know that.
Sukkot we came to visit you.
That's the last night we see this short.
It's Shabina Rav, by the way. Used to have. It's very lot of stories about with some Meltzer. They used to have over Cholamoyed times so you could come in to speak to him, and people would come round. You would have like 20, 30 people. They'd come in and out. Have the $11 like a shiva house. And he would sit at the end of the table, and people would talk. And many of the great halachas and shailas and stories were established in those meetings. I told you once that I used to learn by Mr. He himself went many times to Shem Zaman on Cholamoyed. He would sit there. Sometimes he would speak up. Most times he would keep quiet. People like Misha Halbeshtam, Zulu, would sit around and they would talk over. There would be refreshments on the table. And they would say over different halachas, different shailas. It was a very beautiful room must come and really it's a shame. We should really do that. Get together and everybody should bring in their idea what was this chadish to them, which halachas came up with them. Can you imagine going to a place like the Shabina Rav, the Teplika Rav used to be there. It was very nice. It was a very nice one. I just want to say one short story. I saw give Rab Chizuk. Shosha Pinkus says a story. He says he gave him a lot of chizuk. He had a friend who never lost his wife, not a friend, somebody he knew, who lost his wife in the Second World War. He had no children. He was desperate to get remarried. He spoke to Viskarov. Viskarov found him a shidduch. For years, she didn't have children, 10 or 12 years or something. Then she had 2 children when they were both old. So he said to him, Mistama, how did you get to such a schus? 2 children in your old age, both of you so old. He said, I tell you what happened. He said, we never had children. And I never ever told the Viskarov that we don't have children. I never asked him for bracha because I knew if I go and tell him we were desperate for children, we don't have children, how upset we are, he would feel bad because he was the shadchan. And I never wanted to upset the shadchan. I'm a Talmud of Viskarov, so I never used to mention to him anything. And in this chus that I never wanted to upset the Viskarov by telling him that we didn't have children, he was able to have 2 children. That's the story. Okay. It's a very nice story. You have to sometimes be sensitivity. Sometimes I think he said this Chassid Shemaisa where you don't ask for a bracha, and that's why you got the Yeshua. Okay, we're up to the Afyudah Mudalef top line. We're discussing now what to do with the Trumas Halishka, what to do with all the money that we collected. And as a side point, the Mishnah mentioned Shemri Sfichin. Shemri Sfichin was very briefly, if there was produce that grew by itself, so what happened was they could use it for the Oima, but the problem was maybe an animal or somebody would help themselves to it. So therefore they would have guards about it. I would just have to point out, there's a big machlekes to Shonim over here, nice like this. The halacha is that everything which is guarded on Shemitah is forbidden to be eaten. So how could you have Shemri Sfichin? They're doing an Aveva in the process, okay, they get paid, etc. So the some Rishonim hold that they didn't actually guard it. What they did was they would stand there. Any man who wanted to ask for it, they would say, look, you can help yourself, but you should just know we've designated this for the Omer. And what happened was people would be reluctant to take from that which was designated for the Omer. Others explain that Taka will see later that sometimes they were ready to be over Isurim just for the sake of being in the Korban Omer. But what we had in our Mishnah was a Machlikas Tanoim between Chachamim and Rabbi Yosi. Can somebody donate on his own accord to be a guard for the Shemei Sfichim or not? does he actually have to get paid? What's the machlokas? Anybody remember what the machlokas is all the way from yesterday? What's the machlokas? Machlokas is because it's a mitzvah which comes from the tzibur. If one person donates in his own accord, then it's not a tzibbur's call, but it's an individual's call. So now the Gemara brings a few proofs either way. The Gemara starts off with a Mishnah in Tanis, where the Mishnah discusses, a Beis in Tanis actually, that there were 9 dates, like times in the year, when there were certain families that had a Yom Tov. These families were the families that brought wood by the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. So what happened was they brought wood at a certain time of year, and they begot what's called a chazaka, that they are entitled to bring wood. Now, what's the question? Anybody got a question? Oh, very good. That is it. Says the Gemara. What was special about these times they should be mentioned? When Kaisa came out from Golus, there was no wood. They gave wood. The Nevi made a condition. They made a special reward since they were the ones who brought the wood at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, there was zeicha that from then on, every single year, on the date which they gave wood, they have a right to give wood. And even if the Beis Hamikdash has other wood, we use their wood first. I just want to go on to a couple of points. There's a Shaitz Shuvas Divrei Yatziv, there's this old Kreuzberger Rebbe, and he said this is a very sadistic halacha, that this is the idea of a chazaka. And you should just be aware that halachically chazaka is very, very, very powerful. Somebody told me the gates at Koilo, for years, beginning, would always give Chosin Torah to a certain person. After a few years, they wanted to make more money. They decided to sell it. And what happened was, the person that got it for a few years said, no, you've given it to me for a few years. They said, no, you can't do such a thing. They went to Rav, and the Rav paskant that chazaka is absolute. You cannot get rid of chazaka. You have to be very careful with chazaka. These people gave wood first, and therefore they're entitled to give wood forever. Another interesting point, fascinating point from Rabbi Pam, interesting point. He says like this, that if you look, he writes like this, it's like this interesting. If you look in most nowadays modern day books, what do you have in the introduction, on the acknowledgement page? You have, thank you to my wife, thank you to my sponsors, thank you to all the people that helped me. He says, if you look, never existed in the olden days. In the old days, you open up Mishnah Berurah, it doesn't say once a thank you to anybody. You go back to the Ktsuris, the Sivas, they never thanked anybody. Why has it changed? He brought down, I can't remember who from like this, that it says in the Pasuk of Ezra, it tells us how many Yidden came up from Babel to Eretz Yisrael, how many horses they brought, how many cows they brought, and how many sheep they brought. And the question is, by being in Beis it's got no mention of anything. The idea is that when everybody's keen to do a mitzvah, and you do it, it's not so exciting. And therefore, you don't deserve such recognition. In the second Beis Hamikdash, the majority of Klal Yisrael stayed in Golus. A minority, a small minority came. When most people are not interested in doing that mitzvah, and you do it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu favors you much, much, much greater. So the Pam said that all the days, everybody wanted to sponsor forums. Therefore, the fact that you helped to bring out a sefer did not deserve recognition. I think he brought for Shem Yehuda, but nowadays, when people have got less recognition of Kovda Torah, so somebody who's Machshiv Torah is even more special and nice for Hashem. What? What's the Gemara say?
How when they came to bring the Beis Hamikdash, and not everyone came.
Right.
And there's a select few are using even with mitzvahs, the nation with mitzvahs.
That's exactly this.
The Gemara goes too.
You were there. That's the Gemara. Okay, but the vast majority of Kaisar gave to the Mishkan. It was too much within 2 days.
No, but it says that they had to gather together by the eagle and they brought.
No, that's not a kasha. That's not a kasha. Not again. But therefore, you see over here that these 9 families they chose to give on that date, and they got chazaka forevermore. But what do we see from there? What's the main point, as you pointed out earlier? That the problem over here is, what about the common symbol? There's no common symbol over here. Says the Gemara. Omar b'achad Rabbi Yosi, it's Rabbi Yosi v'ar Mishnah. Rabbi Yosi ma'aforitz v'stad of Shem Echinam, a person can be Shem Echinam. So you see that Mishnah, that Beis, which says, that Chazal which says that the 9 families donated, fits in according to Rabbi Yosi. The Yisud of Machlikas Rabbi and Chachamim. Does anybody know what's the Machlikas of Rabbi and Chachamim? What's the Yisud of Machlikas, where a person can donate from his own time? That's a later Gemara. You must be reading later. Maybe you've seen another Gemara. It's cheated.
Is not mamish permitted itself.
Okay, the Gemara will discuss that also later. Just take this. What's the Yisud of Machlikas Rabbi and Chachamim? Is like this. When an individual donates, we are nervous that he's not really doing it to the full heart. Since it's not doing it with a full heart, so it's still his, and therefore it's not common sybil. The Chum say that that's why they don't allow it. So Beis is not choshesh. What? Oh, but Matzis has shekel. Everybody gives the same amount. If one individual gives, we're choshesh that that individual is giving a specific thing. We're choshesh separately. That's right. They only argue about the carbon itself. Of a machshire carbon, something which is only a machshire carbon like the wood. Everybody agrees from Mishnah carbon yochid the carbon sibur. You're allowed to change carbon yochid the carbon sibur. Gemara has a very similar style Gemara, almost identical. Tony Isha, imagine a woman gets a son, becomes a kohen. How could a woman have a son become a kohen? Let's say she was a Yisroelis. She married a kohen. She married Toli. Is his wife a kohen? Oh, and then she has a son who's a kohen. And then what happens is she decides she's so excited. So what does she do? She sews her own clothes to give it to him. Good or no good? Yes, but he wasn't a kohen. He was a Levi, so he didn't need to have big tekuna. You're the challenging mood tonight. Good for you. But the Beis, he was a Levi, not a kohen. It's a good point, Akem. But he got buried in the same kohen. Anyway, no, he's a kohen. It's also a Levi. The Beis, what's the din? Can she make her own clothes for the kohen? What would you say? What's the halacha? Come on, what would you say?
No.
I thought you said machlikas Beis and Chachamim. Says what Isha shasok senis lebno kasher u'bachet v'senu letzibur. Omar b'achad Rabbi Yisrael mafawis v'sad v'shebechidom. Person can do that shebechidom. Rabbi Yisrael v'shebechidom illa diva koili. Ma pligi b'gufis shkol machshir kol n'kam amoidish v'nishtan kol yochid kol tzibur. Everybody agrees you can have a kol yochid kol tzibur. So we've got machlokas over here. Whether the machlokas between Rabbi Yisrael and Chachamim is always across the board, or is it only by machshirei korban? So, what? Oh, very good question. The one you asks the question. But this is very good. Even these days of Yom Tov, listen to this. At the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, there were 9 families that gave wood to the Beis HaMikdash. Those 9 families keep a Yom Tov and they don't fast and have a special Yom Tov, even after the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So this is a tradition that went on for more than 400 years, because the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash was 420 years. As a simcha that they were the ones who donated. And there is Shittas Chachamim. Is only the Rabbi Yossi argues only Mishas Beis HaMikdash. The Tanya Rabbi Lezer B'Av Tzadok Onu B'nei Sanor Ben Binyamin. Rabbi Lezer B'Av Tzadok was descended from Sanor, the son of Binyamin. And their day, which they gave wood to Beis HaMikdash, was the 10th of Av. It was the 10th of Av. Now what happens? Imagine Tisha B'Av falls on a Shabbos. So when do we fast? 10th of Av. But there was a clash. The 10th of Av was his personal Yom Tov. Why was his personal Yom Tov? Because he gave wood that very first year the Beis HaMikdash was built. But now that next, let's say 20 years later, Tisha B'Av landed on a Shabbos. So now, should he fast on Tisha B'Av or not? He didn't fast. The whole Tisha B'Av is Shabbos. The Chidus and Shabbos we fasted only part day. It's a bit brought down by a bris, which is on a Sunday. Oh, Levi, bris on a Sunday. You ever done a bris on a Sunday at Tisha B'Av? You buy one?
Yeah, I was buying one in 2 years ago.
What?
On Tisha B'Av was on Sunday.
Right.
And
Do you hear that? If Tisha B'Av is a Shabbos, you push off to Sunday. So it's a Tisha B'Av Nidcha. Wait a second. So Tisha B'Av is a Nidcha, and the Sunday is a Yom Tov, we push it. So we see that the Shittas Chachamim is, even by such a case, they held that it is a Yom Tov, and therefore they held that they can give a Yochid, can give it to Tzibur. And the reason is because even a personal korban can be brought as, even every korban can be brought, and there's no such thing, a Yochid could change it to Tzibur. Okay. Says the Gemara weiter. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah says that on the year of Shemitah, what would they do? What would they do in the year of Shemitah? You need to bring the Omer. So what would they do? Anybody remember? Talked about it. What would they do in the year of Shemitah to bring the Korban Omer? What would they do? Oh, so they would guard the Svichin. Now, why did they guard from the Svichin? You've got a much more simple choice. What's the much more simple choice? No, you know, we'll see in a minute about planting. What's much more simple? Take it from Chutz La'aretz. Take it from Chutz La'aretz. Why did they have to guard the Svichin? Take produce from Chutz La'aretz. Says the Gemara, Mastisa do Rabbi Shmuel, the Shmuel in the Bob Soya. Omer can't come from Soya. He owes even Soya, which the Melech conquered, and therefore you might thought is Kaddish. The Omer can't come from there, and therefore you can't bring the Omer from there. Tamon Tanino, Kokoli say Yochada Sibu Boy Minoes for Chutz La'aretz. A Kohen can come from Eretz Chutz La'aretz. Mina Chodosh, Mina Yoshem from the new or the old. Chutz Mina Omer V'Shtei Alechem Shein Boy Edo Mina Chodosh Mina Oretz. Only come from Chodosh and from Eretz Yisrael. So we've got again another place which we hold back in Yisroel. Again, we have a machlekes. Can you bring Omer from Chutz La'aretz? So Yisroel says you can't. The Chacham says you can. We've got our Mishnah and another Mishnah which supports it. Tamon Taninon, Eser Kedushas saying there are 10 Kedushas. That means it's in the first perk of Kelim. Should the Rambam writes first Mishnayos that everybody should learn the first perk of Kelim, not once, not 10 times, not 100 times, until you know it back and forth. Because if you know the first perk of Kelim, you'll be zeicher to know a clarity in Taurus. That's what he says. You should learn the first perk of Kelim. He says the first Mishnah is Rambam. You should see the Lashon he writes, and it's got many of the what's the word for it, famous Mishnahs. One of the Mishnahs there says there are 10 levels of kedusha, meaning that if you go, there are 10. That means the Kodesh Kedoshim is the highest. Then you've got the Beis Midrash is the second highest, and the Zohar of the Kohanim is the third, and then you've got Ezras Yisrael is fourth, and you go down. So there are 10 levels of Kedusha, and then it works it all out. So it's quite a good place to work out all the things. So it says, Eretz Yisrael Kodeshes, Kol HaOtzes, Eretz Yisrael is holy in all other countries, so my Kedusha, Shemevin, Meno Omer Ba'Bikur Mishtei Alech, Ba'She'en Mevin Kol HaOtzes, is Abchir V'Shem Abiyom Yodu Rabbi Shmuel, He Rabbi Shmuel and Bob Nasoyo. So L'maisa, you've got 3 places which we pass like Rabbi Shmuel that Omer can't come from Chutz La'aretz. Our Mishnah, which says they have to guard the Svichin. The Mishnah which says this korban of Omer can't come from Chutz La'aretz, and the Mishnah which says Eser Kedushas that it says more Kodesh that you can't bring Omer Shalechem from anyone else. There is a pasuk like this. The pasuk says, Rashi al-Atur asks this question. The Torah says, Sheish Samim Tavod Uvashvi B'Chodesh Uvakotze Tishbus. On the 7th day, you mustn't harvest and you mustn't plant. Now, what's the obvious question? Anybody want to ask the question? What's the question? Pasuk says 6 days you're allowed to work. On the 7th, you shall not plant. No, it says you should not plow and you should not harvest. What's the question? It's a famous question which comes up in many places in Shas, and Rashi al-Atur brings both explanations which come up in 2 different places in Shas. Again, no, it's a much more simple question. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to build, you're not allowed to make a fire, you're not allowed to sow. The pasuk says, 6 days you shall work. On the 7th, you're not allowed to plow and you're not allowed to harvest. What do you mean not allowed to plow, not allowed to harvest? What? No, it says you're allowed to work on 6th or 7th, you're not. Okay, that's another question, maybe. Let's get the question which the Gemara asks many places. Why is it specified not plowing and not harvesting? Why not say not allowed to burn a fire, you're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to sow, you're not allowed to build? Why those 2? There are 2 completely different answers which are brought down in Chazal and both brought down in the Ram Malach L'Maisa. One answer is like this, that we're not talking about Shabbos, we're talking about Shemitah. And the pasuk is telling you that before Shemitah, you're not allowed to plow in preparation for Shemitah, and you're not allowed to harvest after Shemitah that which grew in Shemitah. So what happens is the pasuk is saying that on the 7th, meaning the 7th year, there's a certain amount before Shemitah and after Shemitah which is forbidden. That's why the year of Shemitah, the halachas of Shemitah last much more than a year. They last about almost 2 years because it's like 6 months before and 6 months after, you've still got the halachas of Shemitah. That is one pshat. Another pshat is the pasuk is putting the 2 together to teach you that you're allowed to cut the omer on Shabbos. How do you see for that pasuk allowed to cut the omer on Shabbos? Because there's never such a thing as plowing the Shem Mitzvah. There's no such thing as plowing the Shem Mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to ever plow. Harvesting, there is a mitzvah. When is there a mitzvah? For the omer. The Torah puts the 2 together to tell you, you're not allowed to plow like you're not allowed to harvest. Just like plowing, there's no mitzvah involved. Also harvesting, there's no mitzvah involved. But when there is a mitzvah involved, you are allowed to harvest. So from the pasuk which says, B'choresh uvakotze tishbois, what do we learn? You're allowed to cut the omer on Shabbos because the omer is a mitzvah. So the world says, someone to the Shul Mar Cholish Shus Avkos Shus Yosik Seima Shu Mitzvah. Vishro Kada Teda Vishro Domai Nema Bom Nasuya. It comes like it's his own shit. Why? Because according to him, the mitzvah of harvesting them is part of the mitzvah. Since it's part of the mitzvah, it has to be from a kodesh place. So there it's so. Now here's a bit of difficulty. This the Shabbat sometimes does. We said before, our Mishnah is going like a Bishmor, not like a Bishmor. Does anybody remember?
Yes.
That's only like a Bishmor. Now then we'll ask the question again. Who does our Mishnah go like? Man Tana Shivas Vichid Bishvis Leitis Chom to us. Let's go Bishmor here to Bishmor. Or maybe it's Divakeli, Le Motsu Besi, or maybe no Smesichish Beretz so. The Gemara says you've got no right that our Mishnah is like a Bishmor. Maybe our Mishnah holds you allowed to bring the Omer from Chutz La'aretz. So why is our Mishnah asking people to guard it? Why is our Mishnah asking to guard? The answer is like this. We're nervous that we won't find in Chutz La'aretz. After all, the Omer has to be bought the second day of Pesach, which means that you have to have the produce ripe very early. And the Chutz La'aretz doesn't get ripe so quickly. So maybe you're allowed to get from Chutz La'aretz. So why does our Mishnah say you have to have Shemei Svichen? It's a typical Dilshul question. The Mishnah says you have to have Shemei Svichen. Why do you have to have Shemei Svichen for them? There are two mahalchim. One is, Rabbi Shimon, you're not allowed to take from Chutz La'aretz. Only from Eretz Sol, the Eretz Sol is Shemitah. Or Be'emes you can get from Chutz La'aretz as well. But we're Choshesh, you might not find the Chutz La'aretz. Therefore, you have to guard that. Now the ask the Shaila. Are you allowed to plant for the Omer? Normally on Shmita, you're not allowed to plant. Are you allowed to plant specifically for the Omer? Is not the same. The halacha is that if a kohen does a kmitza on the mincha, and the mincha's posel can't be eaten, then the kmitza is also posel. Now, an omer, what did it do with the omer? A kmitza went on the mizbeach, and the vest was eaten. If the vest is going to be planted on shmita, it can't be eaten. If it can't be eaten, there will be a kmitza. Full stop. Now, halacha is that certain times we say tumah hutzah b'tzibur, and even if a kohen's posel, the shechita and the zvika is okay. One of the cases kohen Pesach. So too, by the kohen omer, maybe you're not allowed to eat the omer, but the kmitza is still good. Now the more asks a question over here. Let's get to this question. This comes up again many places in Shas. You have a shaila like this. The halacha is that whenever you have kodesh money in the Trumas Halishka, you've got a room full of silver. The money cannot be used unless it's redeemed on a specific item. You can't redeem it on something which doesn't exist. So let's say I worked very hard. For a whole year, I've been standing around a patch of land telling people, don't take this produce, don't take this produce, it's going to be for the Omer. I come now with my hand out and I say to the treasurer, pay me. What's he going to do? Pay me? With what was he going to pay me with? He can't pay me with personal money. Why can't he pay with personal money? Because the halacha is that it has to come from the tzibur. To pay me with the Trumas Halishka money, how can he? At the moment, there's no item. The produce, first of all, is not ready to be used. It has to first be threshed and harvested and all the rest of it. So how can he pay me? This is a question that comes up in a few places in Shas what to do. And the always gives this solution, which has got a lot of the numbers. We'll leave just to the basic. The Gemara says like this: the treasurer goes to a bank, asks for a loan. He uses the loan, and he gives it to me and to all the people who worked from the loan from the bank. Now, since the treasurer borrowed money, it's Klal Yisrael's money. So therefore, the money now is not. It's therefore now it belongs to Klal Yisrael. Actually, Kavod happens all before the Omer. Or maybe Mois with Trumas Halishka or Mechaven Olav. And then what you do is you take the money of the Trumas Halishka, and you take the pile of grain when it is ready to be brought as a Minchas Omer, and you redeem the money onto the Minchas Omer directly. It says, well, the Tovus Ked, is it good? Why? The Moses says a kasha. What's the kasha? And what will happen is I will work on a huge patch of land. How much of it will become for the Omer? Very, very small, because they used to thresh it 30, they used to sieve it 13 times. So the money is not going to be the value, the value will not be the same. And it says the Gemara, we would declare that the value of the amount which is used for the Omer is equal to the amount earlier. That means the Beis Hamikdash is allowed to charge a higher price for its items. So therefore, we redeem it on a higher scale than what it's really worth. The Gemara says exactly the same question regarding the builders. the builders of the walls of Yerushalayim, builders of the walls of Beis Hamikdash, they would get paid. They couldn't get paid from the individual pocket because at the end of the day, it has to come from the tzibur. They couldn't get paid for the Tumas Halishka because you have to give them something in return. So what they used to do is like this. They would work, get a loan from the bank, get paid from the bank, and then later, when the brick was completely ready to be placed in the wall, then they would redeem the money of the Tumas Halishka onto the brick. The brick would become Kodesh because it would transfer the Kedush of Tumas Halishka, and the money of Tumas Halishka would become Choyim. Those who would who are the stones, so you would give it to those who put it out to the ground and to those who smooth it out. Actually, before it's put on the rope. Maybe Moses to Salishko, Mechelen Olav, but Thomas kid is that good. We evaluate its original price from the beginning, and we say that's the cost of that brick. Next Mishnah, Yud Amud Beis. The Mishnah goes through a long list of things that we paid from the Tumas Halishka, and certain things that we paid from the Shiur Tumas Halishka. What's the Shiur Tumas Halishka? Anybody know? After the 3 buckets, what's left in the room. Some say even what's left in the bucket when the next truma became. Okay. The Pashas, like Toli says, is what's left in the buckets. You've got 2 coins, the Tumas Halishka and Shiur Tumas Halishka. The basic rule of the thumb is that anything which was actually brought on the Mizbeach came from the Tumas Halishka. Anything which was an integral part of the Avodah came from the Tumas Halishka. Anything which was like slightly less important, so to speak, slightly less fundamental, would come from the Shiur Halishka. It says the Mishnah, Por is the Por Aduma which they would burn. How many Por Adumas were there? How many Por Adumas were there in history? There were only 9 Por Adumas, the 10th one Mashiach will do. That's the he-goat that they pushed off the cliff. This is referring to a piece of tongue of red wool, which they used when they burned the Por Aduma. We'll see there were 3. Part of the money, part of 3 buckets. So boy the Tumas Halishka came from Tumas Halishka. Kevesh Po. The halacha is when it came to the Por Aduma, it's a chaval to lose this Yisroel Mishnais. When you came to the Por Aduma, they were very, very careful that nobody should become tummy. How would they be careful? Anybody ever learned the sugya to be careful to become tummy? On the elephant, the women would go and give birth in a special place. And one of the things they used to do is, when they would walk to burn the Por Aduma, they were scared that they're walking over a dead body or touching a dead body. So they made a platform. It was like a archway. Now the problem with an archway is, if you're standing on top of the archway, you're fine. Because if the dead body is underneath the archway, so then you've got the bottom of the archway is protecting you. But what happened if the dead body happened to be underneath the pillar of the archway? Every archway is never going to be miles long. Every archway has to have a certain strength. So if there was only, let's say, every 10 meters, you've got a pillar of the archway. So if there's a dead body underneath the actual pillar of the archway, and you're standing on the archway, then now the tumah can't get stopped. Tumah only stops if there's space, but there's no space because you put the pillar there. So what they did was they made second archways on top of archways. So what happened was like this: the archway would always overlap the other archway's pillars. So therefore, what happened was it was staggered. And therefore, there was no place where if a dead body would be, you'd actually be standing on top of it. There would always be at least some air gap between. Different levels. It's like more Sukkah or Yuma side, beginning of Yuma. We'll come to it to get to it. So that ramp. Oh, or in Miron, you mean? In Svas. He's got. The Kevesh Sam Ishtalech. There was a special ramp for Sam Ishtalech. Does anybody know why that's a special ramp for Sam Ishtalech? Anybody remember the Mishnah in Yuma? The person would walk with the Sam Ishtalech. There were certain people in the eagerness to get rid of the Averas would get in the way and pull his hair out and drive him mad. So they made a special ramp. But Loshen Shvein Kronov and this piece of wool that was between the horns of the Sam Ishtalech. The Amas Samayim, the spring of water which went through the Beis Hamikdash. Does anybody remember what we did with the spring of water at Pesach?
In the fall.
Very good. We'd block up the end of the stream and the water would rise and then flush everything out. The walls of Yerushalayim, the towers. They came from the leftovers of the Lishka. So you've got now 2 lists. That which came from the Lishka, that came from the leftovers of the Lishka. Abba Shol argues and said that the ramp of the Por was Kohanim Gedolim would pay for it on their own. Moisa Shiur Lishka, if there was left over of the Shiur Lishka, what would they do with it? Rabbi Shmuel says that the treasurer in the Beis Hamikdash would do a roaring trade with the leftover money of the leftover Shiur Lishka. Again, you have the 3 buckets, then there's leftover money in the room. The leftover money in the room, what did they use it generally for? What? For all the stuff we just said, keeping the maintenance of the town, maintenance of the spring waters, maintenance of the ramps and things like that. But what happens if there was still even more money left over? At the end of the year, they'd come to a new thing. What they would do is they would buy flour and oil, and they would try and buy it at a cheap season and sell it at an expensive season, and they would make more money for the Beis Hamikdash. That is Shittas Rabbi Shmuel. There's a danger. Can anybody tell me what's the danger?
Yeah, when it goes down.
Oh, very good. That's the question is, it's a danger. You don't always know it's going to go up. What? Oh, very good. The Gemara asks the question. You heard Tony's question? What's it going to help? You make more money. What are you going to do with the leftover money? So you made more profit. But now what are you going to do with the money?
One day they'll be self-sufficient.
You don't want that. You don't want that because the Machzor Shekel would come new every year. Rabbi Kiva says that this is important to halacha. The Rambam paskins this. You're not allowed to invest money which belongs to the poor or the Beis Hamikdash. Why are you not allowed to invest money? You've lost the investment. What can you do? We'll see the more interesting. You could do an investment on condition that you will replace all losses, and you'll split the profits. Okay, Rabbi Kiva holds the Rambam paskins this. You don't invest money in Shteidish. I remember once there was a big stocker which invested money in investment when bankrupt. It was a big Hashem, I must admit, in the sense that they were always collecting money, and suddenly that all this money went into something. But that's it's not geschmack. But Maisa, Kiva holds you don't invest money. Moisa had truma mayosim, but this is referring to the leftover of the buckets of the truma. The Gemara says different shit. The Mishnah says, we would plate the walls of Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the walls would get thicker and thicker with gold. Rabbi Shmuel, the leftover of the food, the Gemara later will describe what does that mean. Kait and Mizbeach was the kabbonis of the Mizbeach. Moisa Truma Lekli Shoros was used for to buy new kelim. Rabbi Kiva Moisa Truma Lekait and Mizbeach, Moisa Nesochim Lekli Shoros. Whenever somebody bought money from the Sochim, there'd always be a bit left over because they would always have to give the full price, and sometimes we'd get it cheap, but that would go to Klei Shoros. More describes the difference of Chadanis Kala Konim. Did anybody remember what Chadanis Kala Konim used to say? What was his Chiddush in Tumah V'Tara? Miyomo lo nimnu akoyanim elisroif. Do you not remember it? They never stopped themselves from burning Tumah, which was Tomei, with Tumah, which was Torah, because okay. The way most before explained, they did not agree with the Beis, meaning that what? They did not agree that you're allowed to invest the money into buying fruit. They held that you shouldn't do any investments. Too high risk. There are 3 places in the Torah where you have to use a tongue of wool, meaning like a strip of wool. Shosoi, that's the soy mishtaleach, was what? Besela. You would buy one which was the weight of a seller. Shel mitzvah, the mitzvah b'shekel was half. Why would the mitzvah be half of the one of the soy mishtaleach? Does anybody want to suggest a reason? The reason is the soy mishtaleach, he would rip it into 2 pieces. One he would tie to the horns of the soy mishtaleach and push it off the cliff. Another half you would tie to the rock nearby. So you want it to be of a certain substance. So therefore it has to be twice. The soil, the lotion of the mitzvah, you just used it to sprinkle blood on him. It didn't need to be such a thing. Shalpo, the paraduma b'shteistam had to be 2 salah. The reason is because you used to use it to put it in the fire. And if it's a thin strip of cloth, it would float away from the fire. It won't go into the fire. It won't go into the fire. So I had to wear at least 2 salah. Rabbi Bo Bazav the V'Shem Shimon Mechalafta Shapo V'Shteistem Umechza 2.5 salah. How many dinner in a salah? Does anybody remember? We talked about it once. 4, very good. So 2.5 salah is how many dinner? 10. Yes, 2.5 says 10 dinner. Says the Gemara other shit. If it's the mafkin nishda basol was 10 zuz, which is 10 dinner. I'd ask you, what's the difference between 10 dinner and 2.5 said? I just said it's exactly the same thing. Technically, Khalid asks this question. And he says it's exactly the same. Only one of them was taught it as 2.5 salah, and one was taught as 10 dinner. And it's important when you're taught halacha. Very good. Say the same way as your Rabbi. Very good. Okay. Says the Gemara. Oh, Levi taught me this. He wanted me to say this yesterday. Moses Shoel Ishka Chulu. Yehuda Steinberg. Tabidei Chachamim. Hamalamdim Esakadim al Chashchita. If you teach people Shchita, right, Levi, now you've learned Chashchita, so you can get paid from the Tumas Halishka. Hilchas Kabbalah, how to catch the blood. Hilchas Zvika, Noitlin Schon with Tumas Halishka. They would get paid from the Tumas Halishka. Can you imagine? That's a good way. Pay. Wait. Teach people how to shecht, how to catch the blood, how to sprinkle the blood. You get paid from the Tumas Halishka. About a different shim of I'm imi. Mevake mume kochim. Noitlin Schon with Tumas Halishka. If you check mumin in the Beis Hamikdash, you should get paid from who? Tumas Halishka. And here, Chav brings a very interesting halacha that it brings it from other people. I must admit, he's the one who found it for me, so to speak. That what happens if you're a private owner? You've got 10,000 sheep, right? And you want to be a common oila or shlamim. So what do you have to do? Check if it's got a mum. So who pays them? Who would pay him? Who would pay? Let's say, I don't know, if I've got my sheep's got a mum, right? So who would you pay? Let's say, not sure if it's zuzas or kasha. Go to the sefer. Who pays the sefer? You pay the sefer usually. So why over here did the Chazal say that they should get paid for Tumas Halishka? What's going on over here? No, so you're saying it's only by Kabbanis Tzibur, not by individual Kabbanis. But the Beis and the Shim don't say that. But it's a nice idea. But he says that he suggests it. He suggests perhaps it's only by Kabbanis Tzibur. There's not Pashas Pshat the Gemara. What did you say? I didn't hear what you said, sir. But no, so you paid somebody and then they checked again. I hear. He says a very interesting thing that we did not allow the owners to pay people, because if you are getting paid by a private individual, and therefore you're bribed. Because what happens if you say to him, that cow which was considered as an ola, now it's no good, you have to get another cow. So therefore we insist that you get paid from the Tumas Halishka, which is impartial. Can you imagine such a thing? Oh, Mashgiach Kashrus, that's his way to hear something. Mashgiach Kashrus gets paid by the bakery. Not that Chashav would cast aspersions on the bakery that has two separate cheshevim, besides being owned by somebody who could give it hechshav. The fact is that was therefore Chashav not talking. We're talking about matzah bakery. We're talking about chametz bakery. The fact is interesting. It's very interesting. He brings it. He says, from here we see that we get paid. Did you hear such a thing? You didn't pay that. You didn't pay yourself. Your mezuzahs you pay yourself. For the animals you had to get something. You pay it to a salishka. Okay. Says we're weiter. There was a Sefer Torah in the Beis Hamikdash. When did we use the Sefer Torah in the Beis Hamikdash? Anybody know? By Hakel, very good. On Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, what? No, that was the expensive. That was a separate klaf. On Yuma, they used to every Yom Kippur they used to lay. So there had to be somebody to check the Sefer Torah was kosher. He also got paid to a salishka. There is a gilsa that the Gaon brings, not just the one who checked the Sefer Torah in Beis Hamikdash, but the ones who checked all the Sefer Torah in Yerushalayim, because it was part of the avoid that people would come to Yerushalayim. So anybody who checked Sefer Torah in Yerushalayim, he argues, okay. There were two dayanim, which in the last parak of Ksubas deals extensively with them. Admoin, and I've forgotten the other one. What was his name? Somebody says it over here. There were two dayanim that their job was to pasken all important halachas. It doesn't say who they were. It's like the last parak of Ksubas. It's gone out of my head. I didn't have it in my head before. So Mai said those two dayanim, they would decide all knossos. For example, if somebody would build an extension which they didn't like, they would make all kinds of different rules. They would also get paid from Tumas Halishka. The woman that weaved the paruchas, they would get from the Bedek HaBayis. Bedek HaBayis was a different fund. So you got machlekes, if you weave the paruchas, which fund you got paid from? It says, well, what's the machlekes? My polik. Shmuel about loke korban, Avon about loke binyan. And again, others explain like this.
Where did the money come from?
Bedek HaBayis is a good question where the money came from. Any time a person was makdish, something which couldn't be brought as a korban, let's say a tummy animal, etc., went to Bedek Beis. Now, why? It says like this, that the purichas was used for sprinkling the blood a number of times on Kippur, on the Parim Tov Sibul. So the question is it part of the korban? Or do we say no? The real reason it's there is because it's part of the building. So it's a machlokes, is a part of the korban, comes from Salishka, is a part of the building from Bedek Beis. Oh, the Gemara says, Tana Rabbi Yehuda Gadgadis, HaKeteres, the Chokavunis at Sibul, the Keteres Chokavunis Sibul, Bodim to Salishka. Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach Chokli Shoyes, Bodim Musa Nesachim, came from Musa Nesachim. Mizbeach Ha'ilo, Va'echa Va'azo, is Bodim Shoy Alishka. It makes a difference between the Mizbeach Hazav and Mizbeach HaNechoshes. So maybe somebody could tell me why. Why did Mizbeach Hazav come from one fund and Mizbeach HaNechoshes come from a different fund? Somebody who does Rashi should know the difference. Levi knew. The Mizbeach Hazav was not connected to the ground; it was movable. Very good. Mizbeach HaNechoshes was part of the ground; it was full of the sand. Okay. The Gemara says, "Chutz la'azois," the places outside Hazav, but nishkas Bedek Beis come from Bedek Beis. But on the other Mizbeach Hechav Hazois mo'alim bohen. There's meila v'chiyesh meila b'shivayim. Can you do meila b'shivayim? And come med omer ma'alim b'shivayim. Says the Gemara, "Omar b'chiyah klum omar mer b'sech shnose v'chutz l'shnose n'kaimin." The Gemara asks a question, does not give an answer. The Gemara asks the following question. The money which was used for the stones came from the Shiur Alishka. The Shiur Alishka, the Gemara in the Havana says there should be no meila, and we see there is meila. You're not allowed to, for example, use the stones of the walls of Yerushalayim to scratch your back on. It's meila. So if the Gemara says actually meila, there's no meila Shiur Alishka. The Gemara says, it says there is. It says the Gemara, Meir only said that there's meila when you weren't sure what you were going to do with it eventually. But after the year, when it's no longer used, and you specified it for a specific thing, everybody agrees there's no me'ilah. Why? If you remember, we actually talked about it. According to Rabbi, the reason why there's me'ilah is because sometimes you then, when the 3 buckets were finished, you remember we said yesterday, if 3 buckets were finished, what did you do? You made a new magbit, a new funding campaign, new collection. So therefore, Rabbi holds, no, you don't. You use the old ones. So again, you've got a kasha. Why the Gemara doesn't have an answer? Why are you moyal on the stones of Yerushalayim when it came to the Shiur Alishka according to Rameir, even according to Rameir? Oh, Chizkitel be the good guys. Ashulchan, V'amenoyer, V'amizboiches, V'apoiches, V'akenis HaKarbonis, Divi Rameir, V'chomer Melech HaBakas HaKarban, Elakir V'Kandel. Imagine the Beis Hamikdash Chas V'Sholom is missing a shulchan. It's missing a menoyer. It's missing a mizbeach. Can you do the avodah? Machlokes Tanoim. Shittas Rameir is that you can't. Shittas Chachamim is the only thing that is ma'akav is the kiyod. Why? Because you need to wash your hands. So the Achana Kodesh says from here we see that Achana for mitzvah is greater than the mitzvah itself because the kiyur wasn't a mitzvah at all, it wasn't an avodah. But if you did have a kiyur, you couldn't do the avodah. But if you missed in the shulchan and menoyer, that's fine. Oh, it's not true. It's a steer. Whenever the Torah uses the word noichach, me'akev, then it was me'akev. Tzela, if it says put it on the tzela, in a me'akev. Even the something which says put it on the side is ma'akev. So you see that's a machlokes, it's a contradiction, is a ma'akev or not. We'll stop with just one more line and stop. It depends if we're talking about avodas inside or avodas bechutz. Kabbalah's on the outside, you didn't need anything. As long as you had a key, you didn't even need a mizbeach. The Kabbalah's on the inside, you needed everything. And this is part of the famous tshuva of the Chasam Sofer, which I saw many people actually was something to speak to you about in the first day Pesach. It's not a topic which I find speaks to me, but some people love the topic. Is can you bring Korban Pesach nowadays? There's a tshuva of Chasam. There's many tshuvas about it. And one of the people say, how can you bring a Korban Pesach? There's no mizbeach. So what would you say to him? No, because the Yerushalmi says that if there's no mizbeach, it is ma'akev. And the Gemara asks the kasha, no, it's not. And the Gemara answers, it depends. If it's avodas pnim, avodas chutz. Avodas chutz, it's not ma'akev. You do not need to have a mizbeach. You just have to shecht it next to where the mizbeach would be. So don't tell me that the reason you didn't come Pesach this year was because there was no mizbeach. Because the mizbeach is not ma'akev. Okay, we're up to the second line. Yud Aleph from Daleth. I wish him a very, very good mood, and I hope everybody drinks wine and has a proper fleishke meal. What? Less than a week? No, a week and a half. I don't like this expression, week on Monday. I always get confused by this.
Sure, you want it. Sure. What's the answer? Why don't we have Korban Pesach nowadays?
Oh, some people love the topic and they speak about it. I've seen so many shlichter Kodesh talks about it. So Zeddy was dashing. What did he say? Because the Chassefer says, and he says that's Shatad Agoda. Because the Zvika Saddam is not the Rotzen, because the Shpoch is annoyed with us. And we say in Agoda, Shiagia Domom Akimis Bachon the Rotzen. And there's no Rotzen Hashem doesn't want. But you know something? I'm sure that over the world in the past week, people have been dashing about it. And in fact,